Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. You know, a lot of people wonder all the time, why is it that I don't watch television that much? I don't watch any of these comedy shows, and I definitely don't watch sports. Well, the reason why is I don't like the people who I see on those screens. Bill Maher went full racist many years ago. This is not a recent development. Now, these white leftists have only just begun to notice the last few years or so, and they really began to notice the last couple of years, but black people have been seeing this guy's behavior for well over 20 plus years. The only thing that's changed recently is that Bill Maher has decided that he's going to be all so open about his prejudices. Bill Maher, for the one or two people who are blessed enough not to know, is a so-called comedian, but he draws from the same tired well as Elaine Boozler and Sarah Silverman. Basically, this burned-out pothead is trying to relive the 1980s because that's about the last time he can remember anyone laughed at any of his so-called jokes. Bill Maher started showing his true colors the second that he got a regular gig on TV. His first real TV show was Politically Incorrect. It began airing back in the early 1990s. It was supposed to be ABC's answer to Dennis Miller's HBO show. Dennis Miller, you recall, was showing his racist bona fides pretty much the instant he left Saturday Night Live. So Bill Maher wanted to leave no doubts about what kind of show he wanted to do. The idea was to allegedly have a variety of viewpoints, mostly from entertainment figures, journalists, and the occasional politician. It was supposed to be a somewhat cerebral version of a comedy show, but the title of his show alone told you what kind of slant it would have. Maher got famously butthurt when people pushed back against certain of his guests that he was biased in favor of. One of the major turning points for Bill Maher was when an Asian writer humiliated Sarah Silverman on the show, and Bill Maher was trying to stick up for her. That was pretty much a major turning point when he decided that he wasn't quite right-wing enough. Maher, up until that point, had taken the occasional liberty with his racially edgy material, but he was on broadcast TV, ABC to be exact, and he made sure to remind everyone that he had black friends, mostly to smoke weed with. He got himself canned after he praised the 9/11 hijackers as not being cowards, and this in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. But Maher wasn't off the air for very long. The Dennis Miller show was canceled in 2002, and the very next year, HBO debuted Real Time with Bill Maher. When it comes to its racist mouthpieces, white supremacy simply shuffles the deck chairs around. Cable TV doesn't have the same restrictions as broadcast TV, and Maher intended to take full advantage of that so he could attack the group of people who he's always wanted to take shots at. Black people. Now he no longer had to hold back, and he didn't. Maher would routinely use the N-word, making jokes that were anything but jokes about fried chicken and all of his little double entendres like Schwarzenegger, please. And just in case anyone wanted to accuse him of the obvious racism he was displaying, he decided to shack up with the so-called hip-hop model, Corinne Steffens, aka Superhead. Then again, Bill Maher was famous for all of his little jaunts to the Playboy Mansion. Not that anyone holds that against him. Bill Cosby, on the other hand, not so much. Bill Maher also took to bringing on right-wingers like Ann Coulter, who he clearly likes. He wanted his show to be a safe space for people like that. Bill Maher had been making a bigger and bigger racist fool of himself until finally he was disinvited from a college campus that he was supposed to be giving a commencement speech at. And that was because the students protested him being there for all of his material and comedy. Now, as I recall, he was eventually allowed to speak there after he used his little sideshow as a platform to whine about why he can't give his sage advice to college kids. Well, when he showed up, the college kids turned their backs on him. And that little episode seemed to be the moment that Bill Maher was driven over the edge. He decided right then and there that if people didn't laugh at his jokes, and if people refused to listen to his crappy attempts at humor, then that was proof that America was no longer a free country. He started liberally, pun intended, drawing from the same well as the Fox News crowd. Like a lot of entitled white supremacists, Bill Maher doesn't like the idea that freedom of speech means you have the right to speak, but it doesn't mean anyone is obligated to listen. Bill Maher is the epitome of white fragility. Merely having college kids say they didn't appreciate his comedy routine was enough for him to go full MAGA. But the final straw came when he had Ice Cube on his show. Bill Maher had gotten himself into hot water for his latest anti-black jokes, and I guess he decided that because all the other black guests he'd had on gave him a pass, like Michael Eric Dyson, he figured Ice Cube would play along too, because black celebrities are so desperate to stay in the good graces of these white supremacists on TV. Except Ice Cube wasn't. He went directly at the problem, telling Maher to his face that he thinks because he sleeps with black women, that means he can talk any way he wants about black people, and he can't. Bill Maher was utterly mortified on his own show. He sees all black people and black men in specific as stupid. After all, the only contact that he actually has with black people is black men who he smokes weed with and some ignorant, compliant fool like Michael Eric Dyson who won't give any pushback, or the hood rats and wannabe hip-hop models that he slums with. Maher makes tons of jokes about rappers, mostly that rappers smoke weed, so he just knew that Ice Cube would be cool with it. Or so he thought, after all. Other rappers that he'd had on the show had gone for the okie doke and didn't dare call him out. But Ice Cube ain't built like the rest of those rappers. Cube checked him publicly and minced no words about it. Bill Maher was called out for his slumming with hood rats and dusty dudes, and he resented it no end. Understand that since the time of Thomas Jefferson, white supremacists have always had sexual access to black women, and whereas in the past it was a dirty little secret, more contemporarily these white supremacists use the gutter sexual affairs they have with hood rats as their catch-all excuse to use whenever they get caught attacking or even killing black people. How many of these white supremacist cops have we seen who have killed black people, and it turns out they got a black girlfriend who they trot out in front of the camera to use as a human shield? When these white supremacists like Maher have a black floozy, they do it strategically. People like Karine Steffens think that white supremacists like Bill Maher are just so in love with them that apparently they're doing something behind closed doors that has these clowns wrapped around their fingers, but they're not. White supremacists believe in using black people, to use us for free labor, to use us for sales for their companies, to use us to help them push their political agendas and leave us out, and to use black people so they can get away with anti-black racism by claiming, look, I have a black friend or a black girlfriend. Bill Maher has had a fixation on mocking black people for decades and claiming that Muslims are the biggest threat to the U.S. He doesn't care at all that even the FBI declared that white nationalists are the biggest internal domestic security threat to the U.S., not radical Muslims. Now, Bill Maher is Jewish. He claims that he's only half Jewish or partially Jewish, and he's not even an observing Jew, but when it comes time to talk about things like Israel, he makes it very clear Israel is extremely important to him precisely because it's a Jewish state. So no matter what he may claim, religion does mean more than a little to him, especially when it comes to the issue of identity. But he's the first one to say that identity politics is a bad thing when talking about black people. Now, after the Tree of Life Synagogue massacre, you would think that Maher would have finally abandoned his racist obsession with Muslims and focus on the real threat, that he couldn't avoid doing so any longer. Except that he did. HBO wasn't going to punish him for it. As long as he trashed Muslims, he could do no wrong in the network's eyes. So, in the last few weeks, Bill Maher's been really going in on black people, basically telling us to stop talking about slavery or racism, and more recently, he brought on Elon Musk, who, by the way, was born and raised in apartheid South Africa, to talk about free speech. He brings on Elon Musk, who has been successfully sued for racial discrimination after black employees at his Tesla plant were the frequent target of racial slurs. And what was Elon Musk's response when he heard about this? He said that the black workers needed to get a thicker skin. And during their little chit-chat, Bill Maher claimed to have some unnamed friend who he said his daughter had been taught that George Washington was a slave owner, and that's it. That's all she knew about George Washington. Apparently that's all they're teaching in school. Who's George Washington? He was a slave owner. Okay, on to the Civil War. Really? Elon Musk, of course, followed up on that and said, with all the phony indignation he could muster, you know, kids should be taught more than that. Now, if we were talking about Adolf Hitler, I wonder if Bill Maher would say the same thing. After all, Hitler did a lot more than just the Holocaust. He lifted Germany out of the ruinous economic condition it had been in after the First World War. He revived German industry and even helped to revolutionize it. He hosted the 1936 Berlin Games and even made a media showpiece out of it with his Nazi propaganda film Triumph of the Will. He was responsible for an enormous number of public works projects, including the Autobahn. In fact, Germany was the first nation to have a national highway system, creating the model that the United States would later use. Hitler did a lot of things that had absolutely nothing to do with war or anti-Semitism. But when children learn about Hitler, what are they taught? The Holocaust. Gee, I wonder if Bill Maher would say, well, they ought to learn more than that. Somehow, I don't think so. And when it came time for him to talk to his so-called panel, he had one token Negro on there, and I recognize this fool. He basically is in the same boat as a John McWhorter, another one of these fools who, if he's not in the employ of the Manhattan Institute or some other right-wing think tank, he might as well be. But when talking to this fool, Bill Maher said, well, more black people die from black-on-black crime than from police shootings, so why isn't anyone concerned about that? Yeah, Bill Maher did the old what about black-on-black crime canard. You know, last time I checked, whenever Pookie or Ray Ray have a shootout, there's no doubt that they're going to be arrested and sent to prison, and it won't take weeks of protesting to do it either. And when they get sent to prison, they're going to have a hell of a long sentence. Nobody in the white media will be saying rush to judgment or qualified immunity or that it's really going to be hard to get a conviction. None of the things that we hear when some white supremacist thug with a badge has killed an unarmed black person. You see, Pookie and Ray Ray, when they commit crimes, they're not protected by the state or by the white media. So it's a bad faith argument on Bill Maher's part, but it shows you he's drawing directly from the same well as Stormfront and Fox News. But of course, Bill Maher was far from done. He went even farther with the stupid and said, black people owned slaves too, you know. Now, I'm not sure exactly how accurate that claim is supposed to be, but I am sure that whatever color the people these alleged black slave owners had, they weren't white, and they weren't Indians or Asian either. And because there's no cure for stupid, Bill Maher wanted to show everybody that he's gone full right-wing racist. He pulled out the old, what about black-on-black crime? Well, isn't someone going to say something about Chicago? Never mind that Chicago doesn't even rank in the top 25 of the most dangerous violent cities in America. I show you that every time there's a mass shooting. I show you, hey, what was going on in Chicago this weekend? The much ballyhooed Fox News talking point of, well, in Chicago they had so many shootings. I show you on my crime reports how that's nothing more than Fox News propaganda. But Bill Maher calls himself lecturing black people, and he's got his little conservative clown there, Lowry. He just loves having nothing but conservatives on. And people are asking whether or not this is supposed to be what constitutes a balanced discourse. But he's lecturing black people and saying that black celebrities need to be saying something. Well, I'd like to know, have any white celebrities been saying anything about white-on-white gun violence? All of these mass shootings where you have some white shooter who comes in and kills a whole bunch of white people. Have any white celebrities been getting in front of the camera saying something? Have any of the white celebrities said anything about white supremacist gun violence like Dylan Roof or Peyton Gendry? Killing huge numbers of black people. I'd like to know, have there been any white celebrities talking about that gun violence? Has Bill Maher? To hear Bill Maher tell it, apparently the gun violence rate in the white community is far, far less than it is in the black community. So that being the case, I'd like to know where the white celebrities are to go ahead and put out some sort of PSA and put the kibosh on that one. Except we've already had that. White celebrities like Matthew McConaughey went to the White House and spoke in front of the world. And it changed exactly nothing. So, if we were to ignore the fact that the white-on-white crime rate is almost the same as the black-on-black crime rate, and instead believe Bill Maher's racist assertion that white society doesn't have the same problem with gun violence as the black community, then why is it that white celebrities can't get white mass shooters and others to put the guns down? Shouldn't that be the easiest example of how a celebrity endorsement against gun violence should bring the gun violence rate down? Except it doesn't. I document for you on this YouTube channel mass murder after mass murder in the white community by white shooters. Bill Maher doesn't talk about that. He's interested in Chicago. He needs to be more interested in places like Ohio. 5 people here, 8 people there, another 6 people there. Sooner or later, shouldn't Bill Maher give a rip and say something? He's supposed to be a celebrity, allegedly. But he says nothing about that at all. So Bill Maher doesn't need to mindlessly opine about black celebrities speaking up against gun violence. White celebrities have been doing it and it hasn't changed anything. But then again, what else do you expect from a garden variety white supremacist like him? When you do nothing but smoke weed all day, this is the best your few remaining brain cells can come up with. So Bill Maher routinely uses the N-word, and he brings on a man who is an unreconstructed apartheid racist who protects people who use the N-word at his business. Oh, but Bill Maher's not a racist though, right? He's some sort of free speech absolutist, more or less, right? Actually, less. Bill Maher used to pretend that he basically wanted a dialogue, but since the 90s, every time that happened, he had his wrinkled racist pothead behind handed to him, so now he just wants a one-sided monologue, and he intends to be a platform for any racist who wants to join him, be it Barry Weiss, or tools like John McWhorter, or Elon Musk. Bill Maher doesn't want a safe haven for free speech. What he wants is a free open field for hate speech. That's why he won't bring on anyone who will challenge him. He decided after Ice Cube symbolically castrated him on his own show, he wasn't going to do that anymore. He can't win a debate, so instead he goes on diatribes. But of course, Bill Maher's not alone. Phil Jackson has made the news for racist things that he said about NBA players wearing apparel with socially conscious slogans on them. In fact, Phil Jackson has a problem with black players in general. There's long been talk about Phil Jackson being condescending and even insulting towards black players. Scottie Pippen made waves a couple of years back when he talked about some of the things that Phil Jackson had done when he was coach of the Bulls, and he attributed Phil Jackson's behavior to being racist, the way that he coached to being racist. See, Phil Jackson has always been able to hide behind the media legend that he and Michael Jordan were an inseparable, unbeatable combination. Why, these guys were practically family after all. Yeah, with Phil Jackson being the daddy figure, right? After all, if the greatest basketball player ever won championships with this guy, well, he must be okay, right? Except Michael Jordan has always been a company man. He works for the highest bidder. He's always wanted to be in with the dominant society, and that should never be forgotten. It shouldn't have been Scottie Pippen who called out Phil Jackson's racism, and even so, it shouldn't have taken Pippen the better part of 25 years to do it. But let's be honest, for most of these guys, even after they're out of pro ball, they still act like slaves on a plantation because they're utterly dependent on being allowed to hobnob with white supremacist society. That's where their associations are, their social circle, whatever business arrangements they hope to have, are all dependent on them staying in the good graces of white supremacist society. They have money, they're financially secure, but as they see it, they're on the inside now. They don't want to lose that, so they're not going to say anything. But it shouldn't surprise you that not only did Phil Jackson want to be an NBA player, though nobody can really say what he did of note, it's also no surprise that he wanted to be a coach in the NBA. Like all white supremacists, he doesn't mind being around black people at all. He doesn't mind being outnumbered by black people, so long as he's the one barking out the orders. See, for these white supremacists, it is not and has never been about friendship. A lot of black people go letting themselves get confused on that point. For these white supremacists, it is all about control. That's why they have no problem with keeping their friends close and keeping their enemies, or rather the people they oppress, even closer. And it's no coincidence at all that these two geriatric racists are tearing their behinds at the same time. Bill Maher and Phil Jackson have a lot in common. Both of them absolutely hate free speech when black people are the ones using it. Throwing around racial slurs and pushing anti-black stereotypes like Maher does is not brave discourse. There's nothing brave about it. It's the same cowardly, dishonest, cheap, vile racism that this country has always practiced. It takes no courage for a racist like Maher to attack black people because the network he shills for is owned and controlled by white people. What would be brave would be for Maher to challenge white supremacy for the first time because they have power to attack him. Moron DeSantis is instituting fascistic laws all over the state of Florida aimed at attacking anyone who says anything he doesn't like. This isn't college kids turning their backs on a washed-up funny man from the 80s. This isn't Ice Cube checking a racist chump live on air. These are laws that blatantly violate the Constitution. Now, if Bill Maher was actually the free speech champion he falsely claims himself to be, then he would be grilling each and every one of his guests, especially the right-of-center guests like Coulter and Musk, about the open, blatant right-wing fascism that is being legislated in Florida and across other states that is basically legislating the First Amendment out of existence. That's your cancel culture. But for Maher, he's fine with it because he suffers from the same mental disease that every white supremacist does. He wants to show black people he's in charge. He knows that black people have been able to change the discourse without using laws. And when someone can change society without laws, that means they've changed the society itself. They've changed the social discourse. When it comes to social advancement, legislation is a lagging indicator. It tends to come after the social changes have already been made, when society is ready for some changes to its rules. Black people made it where there's a social penalty for practicing hate speech, and no law can protect you from it. That's the problem that Bill Maher and all these other right-wing nuts have. Now, what do the thoughts and dusty dudes Bill Maher slummed with have in common with the NBA players Phil Jackson used to coach? They have chosen to be subordinate to these white supremacists. People like Maher and Jackson think they've got the upper hand to some degree or another, and they're largely right inside of the arenas that they operate in. Maher had had a couple of blink-and-you'll-miss-it roles in a few movies, not to mention he had been on a couple of TV shows. And the dusty dudes and thoughts that he liked to slum with and smoke weed with were hoping somebody was gonna put them on. Phil Jackson was a coach, and he was supposed to be telling these black men what to do. See, Bill Maher and Phil Jackson are only able to get away with their racist crap because they are in environments where a lopsided balance of power is the way that these organizations are structured. These clowns would be cleaning the grease trap at your local dirty spoon if it wasn't for white power. Which explains why Bill Maher is so eager to maintain it. My point is that as black people, too many of us think it's cute to play footsie with these white supremacists. Too many of us think that as long as they're not waving a Confederate flag in our faces, that means they're not too racist, or we keep making excuses for behavior that we have no excuse for not knowing is bad. It is not some victimless crime when a black person decides to hang out with some white supremacist because he gives them free weed, or when some hood rat decides to have gutter sex with some white racist comedian because he lets her walk the red carpet once and be his mascot for a day. This gives the Bill Mahers the ability to use these fools to ward off the rightful accusations of racism. We cannot allow anyone to use black people as crash dummies. There's a reason we have such low regard for black celebrities. They're the ones who help give these racists cover. Whether it's the self-serving bootlicks like the ones you see on Bill Maher's sideshow, or the $40 million slaves in pro ball who think that they've escaped blackness. That's what the Phil Jacksons are really holding over their heads. Not their jobs, but what little access they think they've got to the dominant society. They fear being shut out of that more than they fear losing their money. Bill Maher's compulsive anti-black racism, though, is no laughing matter. Not merely because he's a lousy excuse for a comedian, but because if all a black person cares about is whether some racist will give them some weed, then that's a Negro who will literally sell us out for a blunt. And if you're really dumb enough to fool yourself into thinking that being Bill Maher's floozy is some sort of come-up, then there is no hope for you. And Phil Jackson's anti-black racism is no game either. Black men made the NBA a profitable business. Black men made the NBA a globe-spanning billion-dollar juggernaut. Phil Jackson would have been some anonymous white player from the 70s if it wasn't for Michael Jordan. Phil Jackson wasn't some kingmaker. He had the lucky fluke of being coach on the Chicago Bulls, coincidentally while they had the greatest player that the game had ever seen. Phil Jackson did absolutely nothing to make Michael Jordan a phenomenal player. Michael Jordan, on the other hand, was the guy who made it where Phil Jackson actually had a championship caliber team. That had very little to do with Phil Jackson. And as for the LA Lakers, Kobe and Shaq were basically coaching themselves. Phil Jackson wasn't some phenomenal coach, he simply had access to phenomenal players. If Phil Jackson was so great, then why didn't he go to New York and try to make the Knicks into something? See, Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant were the ones who made the Knicks into a going concern. We see what happened to them when they left. It dang sure wasn't the coach, it was the players who were out there making it happen, not the coaches. The white media and these racist white sports writers, they love to try to give all the credit to the coach because the coach is usually the only white person on the team. Well, we as black people have to be a hell of a lot more savvy than that. Companies like Discovery and the NBA enable scumbags like Maher and Jackson to get paid for their racism. This is why I don't care for entertainment and I don't watch sports. As black people, we have to have a zero-tolerance policy for the Negroes who associate with these racists. It may take Scottie Pippen 25 years to finally say what we've all known to be true, but we don't have that kind of time to let these racists get away with murder. White power relies on us, allowing them to hide behind our melanin. So job one of defending ourselves from these anti-black racists is to leave them nowhere to hide. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Ginger Vine, Detroit Beauty Supply, Stay Positive, John Womack, and Mad Hatter. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.